Okay, now we check if the mic's working. There we are. Fantastic. Hello, welcome. Great to see you all here. Good to see the promise of a light breakfast has enticed everyone out of bed for our event this morning. I'm Alistair Thomas. I'm the Europe editor at Energy Voice. Delighted to welcome you and kick off what I'm sure will be a fantastic set of sessions we have lined up today. This is Future North Sea, and while we do not have any mystic megs in our midst, we will be asking our esteemed panelists to gaze into their crystal balls and give us their take on what the future has in store. Will that be a homegrown energy transition, a truly integrated energy basin? Will the future see us lose out on industrial opportunity and import more from overseas? What policy levers would a truly engaged and supportive government pull in order to deliver the best possible outcomes? Today, we're going to dig into the opportunities and the headwinds on the horizon as the UK aims to utilise its bountiful energy resources and the real prize that entails. There's much work to be done. For our part at Energy Voice, we see an exciting industry in action. Vast offshore wind investment, efforts to decarbonise our vital homegrown oil and gas, a strong contribution to energy security. And that's all going on as both decommissioning gets underway in earnest and as development of nascent sectors like hydrogen and CCS come to the fore. Today, we'll see those elements converge and discuss what that means for developers, for the supply chain as we draw upon their skills and resource, and for the next generation as we seek new waves of talent to grasp this opportunity. We also must recognize the circumstances of today. When I did this event last year, we talked about an unprecedented level of uncertainty, and clearly recent events have taken that to a different level. And indeed, who's to say what will be said in the political space in the weeks to come, such as at the Scottish Tory Party conference here tomorrow. We must recognise what's being proposed and how that would impact the future health of this industry, but we also must not let that cloud the opportunity ahead, particularly as we make the case to the next generation to join in and tackle this generational challenge that is the energy transition. OE UK, and we'll hear more from them shortly, reckon there's £200 billion of investment potential this decade across oil and gas, CCS, wind and hydrogen. The UK is blessed to have that kind of resource and opportunity. We must not squander it. And while it may seem hard to see at times, there's a hopeful, bountiful future on the horizon. And today, by setting out the vital work taking place right here in the North Sea, we're going to make the case for seeing that through to fruition. So a quick word on the format. We're going to be kicking off with a couple of our keynote speakers before moving into session one, which is going to focus on the challenges and opportunities for mature field production. After a break, we'll be back for a session on future innovation and skills. Both of these will have an opportunity for audience Q&A, so please keep an eye out for our roving mics. And so now I'm delighted to welcome the first of our keynote speakers, industry leaders who are going to set the scene for us. First up, Rob Fox has held various management roles over 25 years in the oil and gas industry across operations, sales and human resources around the world. He's currently the Managing Director for Europe at SLB and sounds like the right man to kick us off. Please join me in welcoming Rob.
Thank you. So good morning, everybody. As just mentioned, my name is Rob Fox. I'm the SLB Managing Director for Europe. Welcome to Future North Sea 2024. Before starting, perhaps in line with our favorite C word, collaboration, just to share, for those who might not know, tomorrow is the International Employee Recognition Day. So for those of you who haven't had plans yet, maybe it's worth thinking about, recognizing your employees, because it's something just as, perhaps as human nature, we don't do enough of. So today, we're obviously here to talk about future of North Sea and the important role the region plays in the future global energy industry. We've got the skills and the expertise here to remain at the forefront of energy transition, but we all have a part to play to make sure that happens. I think we all know the North Sea has had a central place in the UK economy for many, many years. It's one of the key drivers of prosperity and growth, and it's been very resilient. We've, on the flip side, if you like, currently though, we are on a decline on the production. We had our peaks back in 2000, I think of 5 million barrels of oil a day, dropping to a forecast 1.3 in 2030. But we need that continued investment to reduce that decline, to really allow us to minimize our carbon emissions as we go through this transition. The oil and gas will be with us for a long time to come, for decades to come. It's still providing half of our electricity in this country and perhaps 3/4 of our overall energy. Ensuring it's locally produced here is going to give us this energy security. It's going to help sustain the vital supply chain as we move through this transition. And it's going to, of course, ensure that we use that energy, but from low carbon emissions. North Sea gas, for example, is said to be 4 times cleaner than the equivalent LNG imports. So it makes sense to be investing here. Today we have the opportunity to discuss how we can work together to ensure a future that's resilient, sustainable, globally competitive, creating jobs, generating prosperity, and delivering the energy that all of us need day to day. As an industry, we have reduced emissions over 20% so far. I think there's a long way to go, and we must make that continuation. The North Sea can easily be the continued global leader in the energy transition, just like we have been doing over the last 60-odd years in the oil and gas industry. But of course, we do need that stable fiscal environment. The EPL perhaps not helping completely with that. And now we do have some local independents looking elsewhere for investments abroad. Recently, there's been some positive signs, but there's also been some negative. But ultimately, thanks to the voice of everyone here, the voice of our friends in OE UK, I think logic and common sense will prevail. It does make sense to continue that investment here. But we all have a part to play there. I think historically the industry hasn't really done the best job of communicating outside the industry to remind people that we will be needing oil and gas for quite some time to come. And producing it locally, not only we can get low CO2, we can also help the economy and, of course, back to the energy security. So when you're having those conversations with perhaps friends and family, especially outside the industry, do remind them about the importance of investing in the North Sea. And outside that, we also have our big decommissioning work scope. There's about 20 or more than 20 billion spend expected over the next 10 years. That alone will create a significant opportunity for the full supply chain industry and allow us to continue that export of our skill set, helping to keep North Sea as a prominent place in the global industry. So where does SLB, previously Schlumberger, sit in all this? Well, we're still the largest oilfield services company, and we intend to keep that going. But we're also a technology company, working for a balanced planet, focusing on decarbonization and reducing emissions. Back in 2022, we had a new brand, and you can see there that we had a new logo put out as well. For those who aren't aware, this is meant to represent the carbon budget curve that we need to keep global warming less than 1.5 degrees. So it's like a reminder to our employees, to our business partners on a day-to-day time frame of how important this will remain. As a company, we still invest 50% or over 50% of our R&D budget in either new energies or technologies to help reduce emissions. We call these technologies transition technologies, and with our partners, we've been able to reduce over 8 million tons of CO2 so far. On the new energy side, we're focusing on 5 different pillars. We've got the CCUS, of course, but also geothermal, hydrogen, minerals, and energy storage. And we see that technology, and especially digital, is going to help us through this transition. We still have a strong local commitment here. In the region, we've got about 25 sites with over 2,000 employees, and nationally, we're up to around 50 sites with 4,000 employees. You know, we've been here for 60 years, and we fully intend to stay, to help drive the industry through the transition. So if you're sitting in the audience here today, a recent graduate or perhaps a student thinking, do I join the energy industry? Then please do, and come and help us all make a difference. If you're from supply chain or perhaps one of the energy companies, then we need to continue to, that's the C word, to collaborate, to really work on new business models, not so much looking at the short-term contracts, but it's the long, multi-year type partnerships where we really can make a difference. So whether it's abandonment, production enhancement, carbon reduction, or new energy, we need to work together to allow the North Sea to continue to act as a global leader. One thing we've done in SLB to try and help this locally is set up what we call the Performance Center over in Prime 4. So this is like a one-stop shop, bringing all the global technology to our local partners here in the region. Some of the progress we've had with some of the local customers here so far is really very encouraging, and I look forward to being able to share that with you in the near future. So we've talked about the industry, we've talked about where we see it going, and perhaps where all of us can help make sure we spread that message, and we in SLB believe we can help that too. So now I look forward to the rest of the day for the discussions on optimizing production, decarbonizing, future innovation, and talent retention. With that, thank you for listening, and I'm going to, I think, pass over to David here.
Okay, yes, so next up, I think he's got one of the toughest jobs out there, but we'll let him decide. You'll know him for speaking up across the sector, across the media and political sphere as CEO of Offshore Energies UK, respected across the sector for his hands-on leadership in the North Sea and around the world. Please join me in welcoming David Whitehouse.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, so as Alistair said, Dave Whitehouse, Chief Exec at OE UK. He's wrong when he says I have the toughest job. And it's the toughest job as the people who work for us, and nothing brings that into highlight more than actually the events in Norway. We've had a ditching of another helicopter, so I'll tell you what, when we have these conversations, we need to remember actually who really is at the front line when we talk about this brilliant industry of ours. So I know everyone would echo that, but thoughts with everybody involved in that. So good morning. Dave Whitehouse, Chief Exec at Offshore Energies UK. Privileged to be in the role. Thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning. And let me build on, I thought, some of the great words that Rob had about the future of our North Sea. I've worked in the sector for over 30 years. I've always been very proud of the work that we do. Delivering energy, adding value to the economy, looking after our communities. Our sector has a history to be proud of, and as we will talk about today, we are building a future to be proud of too. In an increasingly volatile world, with a country facing a cost of living crisis, how do we deliver economic growth, high-skilled jobs, energy security, affordable energy, all while tackling climate change? Well, the answer to these national challenges is right here with our homegrown energy industry. Today, we support over 200,000 jobs up and down the country, and last year generated over £30 billion to the UK economy, helping to support our vital public services. But the sector's delivered so much more. Our standard of living here in the UK is what it is in part because of our sector. Over £400 billion worth of tax paid over the years. Through the North Sea Transition Deal, we were the first sector to commit to the UK's net zero ambition, and I'm proud that we're not just talking about it, we're doing it. Rob mentioned this. Already our production emissions are down by almost a quarter since 2018, and we remain as a sector committed to achieving our target of a 50% reduction in emissions by 2030 and net zero by 2050. But as we know, the North Sea is not just oil and gas today, and its future is going to be so much more. Today, the UK now boasts the world's second largest offshore wind capacity behind China. We can store over 70 gigatons of carbon dioxide in our reservoirs. That is more CO2 than the UK produced since the start of the Industrial Revolution. So today's topic, Future North Sea, let's look ahead. Look ahead to 2050. What's the vision of the North Sea that we should be aiming for? So my views. By 2050, the UK for oil and gas demand will have fallen. It will have fallen significantly by over 80%. However, we will still be reliant on oil and gas for our energy needs and also for the products 20% of our energy. If we manage our declining basin well, we will be able to produce the bulk of that domestic demand ourselves from fully decarbonised, electrified offshore hubs. That's where we need to deliver. The UK will ramp up its offshore wind production tenfold. The UK in 2050, we must be a global leader in floating offshore wind. We'll deliver carbon storage at scale, not only storing emissions from the UK's energy-intensive industries, but also creating value and jobs storing carbon dioxide for Europe and beyond. The future in 2050 will be highly interconnected. Electricity, carbon dioxide, hydrogen lines linking the UK, Scotland to European markets and beyond. The UK in 2050, we need to become a net exporter of energy. Today, we're importing more energy in this country than at any time in the last 4 decades. We need to be an exporter delivering energy security for the UK. And with our expertise, our innovation, our natural resources, the wholesale price of energy for domestic industrial users here in the UK and Scotland will be lower than the European average. And by 2050, we also need all users of the sea working together. That's the fishermen, that's the renewable sector, that's the oil and gas sector, and others in collaboration protecting this national asset. We will together manage the North Sea to increase its biodiversity, not to diminish it. Technology and innovation will transform our world. It'll transform the jobs that we all do. We will ensure that this is the safest basin in the world to operate. We will attract, retain, and develop the next generation. With a skills passport in place, people will have careers that allow them to move seamlessly between sectors. We will set the gold standards for diversity and inclusion. We will achieve gender balance across our operations. We will anchor our world-class supply chain here in the UK, creating value up and down the country. We will manufacture more. We will export services, technologies, and innovation around the world. The North Sea will be the enduring economic value that supports more jobs, supports our communities, and powers the UK. That's an inspiring future, and we need to fight for it. The opportunities in this sector to transform how we power our society are inspiring, but as Rob says, we risk squandering them. Today, instability, opportunism, short-term thinking is undermining this national opportunity. Policy decisions are being made without necessary engagement with industry, without the necessary engagement with our workforce. Our people, our sector deserves better than this. But we have faced headwinds before, and we've overcome them. And trust me, we'll overcome these. What lies ahead is a critical decade, a decade of real opportunity for Scotland and the wider UK. It's estimated this journey to net zero in the UK will require £1.4 trillion worth of investment. £1.4 trillion worth of investment by 2050. And the lion's share of that is going to come from the private sector. So to seize this opportunity, we need to make the UK an irresistible environment for energy investment. We need to recognise that domestic oil and gas sector has a critical role to play as we transform our energy systems in the coming decades. We must build on, not undermine, the UK's existing industrial strengths, our skilled people, our world-class supply chain. We must unlock opportunities in wind, carbon storage, hydrogen, and do that alongside continued investment in the oil and gas that we need. We need a competitive tax regime across the sectors that provides long-term predictability for investment and, yes, allows a fair return. Enabling the UK to compete globally, we need to compete globally for energy investment. We need to embed a shared set of objectives across all of our regulators in line with a UK energy policy that prioritises jobs, prioritises security alongside our climate goals. We need to deliver an integrated approach to delivering on our climate goals, providing project developers with greater surety. And as a country, we need to invest in strategic UK infrastructure. That's our ports, our transmission systems, our rail networks, and our grid. And actually, most importantly, our people. We need to invest in training the next generation. We need to put attracting, retaining and developing skilled people at the centre of this energy transition. One diverse and inclusive workforce that serves the offshore industry in the short term and builds the skills of workforce that we need for the coming decades. And we need to take the public with us on this journey. A successful energy transition that delivers on that vision is one that is delivered with people, with communities, not done to people and to communities. And we can make a small step next week. It's budget time. Chancellor, signal the end of the windfall tax, support investment across infrastructure, support investment across the energy transition, unlock our potential. Skilled jobs, secure energy, a sustainable future, and a sustainable journey too. Let's work together, unleash our potential, power our future. Let's choose a homegrown energy that is our future North Sea. Thank you for being here today. I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Okay, thank you, David and Rob, for those keynotes. I know everyone would echo the sentiment on the ditching in Norway we saw last night. Our thoughts are very much with the victims and their families. Next, we're going to move on to the first session of the day, addressing challenges in North Sea mature fields while enabling low-carbon production. We're going to hear presentations from 3 of our industry experts before moving into our panel session. I'll gently remind our speakers to keep the time, please. Our events team are lovely. They will chase you off the stage, though, so just be mindful of that. With that, we'll kick off with our first presentation with Mitch Flegg, the CEO of Serica Energy. Mitch.
Morning. Thank you for the opportunity to join you this morning. And thanks to Dave and Rob for, I think, really inspiring opening addresses there. I think I agree with so much of what was said, and I think we are at a crucial time, and the next decade is really, really important. My name is Mitch Flegg. I'm the Chief Executive of Serica. I'd like to think, a medium-sized UK oil and gas producer. All of our production is in the UK. We're going to talk today about addressing challenges in North Sea mature fields while enabling low carbon production. I didn't come up with that title. I think I would have liked something a bit snappier. What are my credentials for talking about that? Well, this is what we do in Serica. We are a medium-sized company that has built a portfolio of assets that largely we have acquired from majors that are coming towards the end of their life. And we tend to buy what the majors think of as end-of-life assets, and our model is to turn them into mid-life assets, is to extend the life, to increase the production, to increase the reserves, to lower the carbon so that we can enable these assets to produce for longer. I'm not going to go into details about the individual assets, but we have 2 major hubs, a northern North Sea hub in the Bruce area, and a southern or central North Sea hub in the Triton area. There's a few other assets that are dotted around. We produce around 40,000 barrels of oil equivalent per day, roughly 50-50 split between oil and gas. And my thesis is that we are doing exactly what the title, I already can't remember what the title of this session is, but we're doing it already. We are extending the life, we are getting more value from mature fields, and we are decarbonizing as we do that. It's a bit of a busy slide here. There's a couple of slides here to try and I'm still trying to establish my credentials here. I'm still trying to say why we can talk about this, because this is not in the future. This is what we're doing right now. The slide on the left shows our corporate reserves over the last 5 years. So starting in 2018, at that stage we had just over 60 million barrels as a company. We've been producing hard during the last 5 years. We've still got those 60 million barrels. It's almost a magic trick. We have invested in those fields, and this is going to come back to the points that Dave was making in particular. We need to continue to invest in this industry. By investing in our fields, we've managed to extend the reserves, we've managed to increase the reserves, in many cases increase the production, such that 5 years after buying, for example, the Bruce cluster that we bought from BP, We've extended the life of that by something like 10 years. We've produced 30 million barrels out of it, and we've still got the same amount left that we started with by reducing costs, increasing the productivity, debottlenecking, and investing in those assets. So we are adding reserves for the country, for ourselves, for our shareholders, admittedly, and we shouldn't be ashamed of making a profit. We do make a profit. We pay a lot of tax, and so it's a win-win for everyone. But importantly, that increase in reserves has actually come at the same time that we've managed to decrease, and I'm sorry the plot's going the other way, to decrease our CO2 emissions. So we've managed to maintain reserves or increase reserves. We've cut our emissions, and already both of the previous speakers have talked about 25% reduction from 2018. These are some numbers that back it up. We've reduced our emissions by 28% in 5 years, which is, a really, I think, an incredible performance, and it comes back to the hard work of the team, of the guys offshore that actually find these little marginal gains because we focus very, very much on the assets that we have. So we now have got to a position where we're doing what we said to start with. We're adding reserves. We are shepherding these mature fields. None of these increases have come from new fields. We've not gone out and explored. We've not gone out and created new emissions by creating new offtake routes. This is getting more and more out of existing fields. I've been told that I need to keep to the time, so I'm going to go straight on. I'm going to give you one example of how this works. And some of you may have seen this. I mean, a little bit depressingly, I've given this part of this talk a few times, and the message I don't think is getting through to the wider world. But this is something we're particularly proud of. This is one of our fields. It's a big gas field called Rum. Rum produces something like 4 or 5% of the UK's gas production. It's a significant field. We inherited this. We bought this from BP in 2018, and you can see there, this is a typical decline field. This is daily production from the Rum field, and you can see that if you do nothing, it declines by roughly 10 to 12% per year. That's just physics. As the pressure comes out of the system, the production goes down. Rum was producing from 2 wells. There was a third well that had been drilled many, many years ago by BP, but never got put into production. There were some problems with it. We decided to make the investment to rejuvenate the field, to get back into that third well and fix it and get it back onto production. It was £100 million it cost us. This is not a small investment. It was a big gamble. And we did it. And basically, we saw a 50% increase in production. And then, a slight tailing off again. The important thing is that we invested, we got more oil and gas, and at the same time, you can see that we haven't, and this is I'm not going to go through this in detail, but the orange plot is the CO2 emissions from the Bruce platform, which is where Rum is processed. The overall CO2 has actually gone down by that period in the same time that we've increased production by 50%. And we've maintained this. I mean, this plot only goes up until the end of 22. Right now, I had a look this morning, and yesterday production from this field was 190 million standard cubic feet per day. So, we're maintaining this. We're continuing to get more and more production for less and less emissions from existing infrastructure, and that's really important. So to wrap up, and hopefully we can come back to some of these things during the Q&A. What do we need in the industry? In his opening, Alistair talked about, I think, the bountiful resources that we have here. I don't think about oil and gas in the ground alone when I'm thinking about that. I think about our supply chain. I think about the skills. I think about the infrastructure that we have in this country, and that's really important. They're the bountiful resources that we have. We've got a world-class supply chain. We need to keep it, because otherwise the brilliant people that we've got can't do the brilliant job that we try and do on wells like the Rum, on fields like Rum. So we need to keep that supply chain in place. We do need fiscal stability. Dave talked about this. We've got to know, when we make an investment, we've got to know how that investment is going to pan out. We need the infrastructure. We've also, this is part of our bountiful resources. We've got fantastic infrastructure across the North Sea. If we have new discoveries, we can tie it back into existing infrastructure. We've got to keep that going, and we've got to invest. That's how it works for us. We invest in our assets, and it works. If we do that, what do we get? And I've shamelessly stolen these from OE UK. The industry will provide the energy transition that we need. It will provide jobs, it will provide growth, and it will get us to net zero. And my timer has just gone to 0. So at that stage, thank you very much, and I look forward to the round table. Thank you.
Okay, we'll keep the timer going. So next up, without further ado, Pauline Innes, Supply Chain and Decommissioning Director at the NSTA. Pauline.
So good morning, everyone. Being fourth speaker up in a session like this has advantages and disadvantages. Some of the disadvantages are many of the points that you're going to make have already been made, but do bear with me. If I repeat, it just, in my mind, reinforces the significance and the importance. Good morning. I'm Pauline Innes, Director of Supply Chain and Decommissioning at the North Sea Transition Authority, and I'm delighted to be back at this year's Future North Sea event. I took a slightly different approach to Mitch in addressing today's conference, in that whilst we had been given a title, I decided I would make my own one up. So I am going to present a short presentation given what I think is an optimistic future for the future of our North Sea. So I'll declare that now. It's going to be a bit upbeat, and I'm also going to declare I'm a little bit biased, and I'm going to look at that from the perspective of the UK supply chain. But firstly, let me start by explaining who we are and what we do. So the North Sea Transition Authority regulates and influences the oil and gas, offshore hydrogen and carbon storage industries. We, like others, are driving energy transition, not only realising the significant potential of the UK continental shelf as a carbon abatement resource, but also holding industry to account for their commitment to have upstream emissions by 2030. And our work is framed around 3 broad pillars. The first pillar is focused on the UK's hydrocarbon energy needs. And at the end of January, we announced that we'd offered a further 24 tranches as the second tranche of the 24 licences as the second tranche of the 33rd oil and gas licensing round. That means we've offered 52 licences in the 33rd round. And we're finalising our assessment of a third tranche and hope to make further announcements later this year. In January, we also granted a development and production consent for the Victory gas field, supporting a project with an estimated net gas production equivalent to the average gas demand of all Scottish homes for 1.5 years. That complements the 7 projects we approved in 2023, enabling over £4 billion of investment. Last year, we also offered a gas storage licence for the Bain site in the East Irish Sea, east of the Morecambe fields, complementing a licence that we'd offered Centrica Storage in 2022. This is all the traditional oil and gas market. It's mature, it's smaller than it's been in the past, but it's still playing a significant role in providing energy and being an economic driver for the UK. Our second pillar is focused on decarbonising the production of hydrocarbons, and this is a kind of newish activity. Now, the NSTA work takes various forms in this, including measuring progress on the emissions reduction targets set out in the North Sea Transition Deal, and you've heard this morning about the progress that we're making in achieving those reduction targets. Whilst the reduction that we've achieved today is good news, we all know that there's much more to do. And that's why we're taking action to ensure that zero routine flaring continues, and we've published tougher guidance on this. And we're also requiring licensees to produce and deliver emission reduction action plans. That includes considerations of electrification, and in April last year, my colleague Tom Wheeler wrote to licensees outlining our expectations for rapid and sustained reductions in upstream emissions. Then in October, we consulted on an OGA plan setting out proposed requirements that aim to drive a reduction in emissions. We reviewed the feedback from that consultation, and we're finalising our position and considering the next steps. This is new and emerging pipeline of work, and from a supply chain perspective, it signals significant levels of investment. The scale of projects that we're seeing for emissions reduction varies. Some operators are looking at minor brownfield modifications, and others reviewing the potential to electrify platforms. None of it's easy, and even the most apparently straightforward options have complexities in their own way. whether that's about demand for equipment or parts, or the scheduling of activity, the lead time for ordering, or securing the skills, resources and budget at the right time. It's a complex addition of work packages that need to be aligned with routine activity. And in the case of platform electrification, not only are there many players and a complex set of regulatory requirements, including grid connections, there's also huge capital investment required. So while we recognise the opportunity, it's not without its challenges, and invariably the call that we hear from across industry is for greater visibility and certainty. So last week we invited 11 operators and 10 technology suppliers to discuss technical solutions for electrification of existing assets. We held a series of workshops in this building, with participants engaging in an open and collaborative manner. Everyone recognises there's more to do, but the workshop, like last week, is a small step on the way and on the journey to realising decarbonisation solutions. And we're not alone in trying to do this. I know that I was at a meeting with OE UK yesterday, and I know that they are also looking at developing a decarbonisation plan and looking at how we can improve visibility of the work that industry is planning to deliver. Now, our third pillar is focused on accelerating transition, and I want to cover that aspect in a little bit more detail. So, with the UK North Sea having substantial storage potential, last year we awarded 21 carbon storage licences in our first ever carbon storage licensing round, bringing the total number of carbon storage licences in the UK to 27. Last year, we also saw the government announce £20 billion of funding to progress existing projects, with HyNet and the East Coast Cluster being selected as Track 1 and Acorn and Viking being chosen as Track 2. This year, the focus for us is on engaging with the new licence holders to progress with our licence commitments and support the Track 1 and Track 2 projects to develop and deliver plans, turning carbon storage into a reality. I don't have time this morning to go through these projects in detail, but if you look at the Liverpool Bay project as an example, what's going to happen there is you'll see a reuse of the depleted hydrocarbon fields and a repurposing of redundant oil and gas infrastructure to store carbon dioxide. To do that, E&I are having to balance decommissioning of redundant infrastructure whilst retaining and protecting others that have a new life, and well decommissioning and drilling of CO2 injection wells is to come in the future. From a supply chain perspective, that's a long programme of offshore activity. But there are multiple aspects to the successful delivery of carbon storage ambitions, and we are doing all we can to facilitate that. So as well as regulating and permitting, we're also supporting the search for new locations by making data open and accessible. And earlier this month, we launched a consultation to identify the details of exactly what information should be made public and on what timescales. Moving on in the interest of time, and I am going to overrun, I apologise, but only briefly. For me, accelerating transition also means managing the hydrocarbon legacy, which brings me to my favourite subject. So decommissioning is now mature as a sector in the UK. Industry's already spent £8 billion, and there's a further £20 billion of activity to come over the next decade. It's a sector where we're using our role as a regulator to support the creation of an efficient market. That means holding operators to account for delivering their decommissioning activities as planned, on time, and enhancing market certainty. And plan attainment is one of our new KPIs. We're also supporting delivery through the development and publication of benchmarks, supporting learning and promoting collaboration as an effective way to deliver. And we're doing what we can to improve transparency and visibility of work, with tools such as Pathfinder showing upcoming tenders and near-term work, and our decommissioning dashboard showing mid-term plans. On that topic, I'm delighted to announce that we've relaunched our dashboard today, showcasing the decommissioning plans for 15 operators. We're grateful to operators concerned for their support, continued support in this, with tools like this demonstrating the commitment of industry to deliver obligations and create an efficient market. As with all the activity I've mentioned this morning, we know that we need a competitive supply chain to meet our decommissioning obligations. We also know that there's a global competition for vessels and services, and we know that if we build a successful industry in the UK, that there's global opportunity ahead. All of that adds up to an obligation that creates opportunity that we all stand to benefit from,
and if we realise it to the best of its ability. I think that's one that I certainly don't want to let go by, and I'm sure there are others here that would agree. So I started my presentation saying I was going to be optimistic, and I'm conscious that in doing that you can risk sounding delusional. But I think there's a place for pragmatic optimism here. That's not to say it's easy. Whatever the challenge in front of us, there's always something we can do. This does feel like a critical stage in our energy transition journey, and while we can all get behind the longer-term vision, I know that the path ahead isn't as clear as we'd like. But this is an industry of pioneers who have tenacity and a vested interest in making things work. That gives me optimism for our future. Thank you.
Okay, getting the steps in this morning. Final speaker before our panel, we've got Jamie McCrory, partner at legal firm Shepherd and Wedderburn. Jamie.
Hello, and thank you for having me. Unlike Pauline, I haven't made up the title of today's presentation, but I'll leave it to you to decide whether I've actually answered the question when we get to that point. So I'm one of Shepherd and Wedderburn's newest partners, and I'm in the regulation practice. I've recently joined Shepherd and Wedderburn from the energy regulator Ofgem. When I was at Ofgem, I had two main roles. First of all, I was head of what they call the systems team, and that's really looking at the kind of incentives that there are available on the market to ensure that there are the kind of changes that we need to change the electricity and gas system and make it fit for purpose. The second role I had was to be head of the enforcement function, which, as the name implies, when energy companies do bad things, I was the guy that was holding them to account, which may be very unpopular in some circles, and I'm told made me quite boring at dinner parties. Since joining Shepherd's, I have been struck by how much my old role at Ofgem overlaps with what our clients are looking at. Our energy clients are very much looking at both sides of the coin, looking very much at the incentives that are available for change, but also with one eye on what happens should change not happen quickly enough. And that is the theme of my brief presentation today. I am particularly interested in the regulatory landscape and the extent to which change could be facilitated by both incentives and what I'll euphemistically refer to as encouragements from the regulator. But before I do that, I just thought I'd refer quickly to this slide, which is to make the point that I think oil and gas in the UK is here for the foreseeable future. This is a graph from the consultancy firm DNV, which predicts that the share of oil and gas in the UK's primary energy supply will decrease from 76% in 2021 to 31% in 2050. However, it will still provide more than half of the country's energy supply over the next 3 decades, which is pretty significant. When I was at Ofgem, the energy regulator, I was all too aware of how tight the margins were on any particular day. And the days like we've got today, those lovely blue days when the wind isn't blowing, I really saw firsthand how little gas there was in the system sometimes. And look, the fact is that the North Sea is vital for energy security in the UK. So I don't think oil and gas is going anywhere soon. I said I would talk firstly to incentivising change, and on that I'd like to have a look at some of the key elements of the North Sea Transition Deal. So the North Sea Transition Deal is not a legally binding document. It contains several commitments from the Westminster government. I focused on a few of those at the front end of the deal. First of all, there is a commitment in the deal for the government to identify potential funding opportunities for offshore electrification. And on this, the government has provided some £1 million worth of funding through the NSTA to support the development of electrification, which is great and goes some way. But as much as that's a step in the right direction, I have seen reports suggesting that electrification in the North Sea will take between 3.5 to £5 billion. So there's clearly a large gap there between the 1 million which has been made available so far and the capital expenditure which is going to be necessary. And it looks to me that that funding gap has to be fronted by the operators. Secondly, on carbon capture, the deal says that the government will commit between 14 to 16 million by 2030. And I'm pleased to say that on carbon capture, we have seen some good progress here with many of the building blocks coming into place. And that's certainly something that we're seeing with our clients who are very interested in this sector and beginning to look quite closely at what for example, the license conditions look like for transport and storage. We've now got the primary legislation in place, which is great. And we've got 2 CCS clusters with Acorn awarded most recently, which will have a real positive impact on the future for the North Sea carbon capture. So for the first time, I think it begins to look quite realistic. And there's a real sense that sequestering carbon in the North Sea is going to happen. On hydrogen, there's a less straightforward route to progress there. The kind of conversations that we're having with clients at present are focused very much on what kind of subsidies are available for hydrogen production. And there's quite a lot of those that are available from government, Scottish Government, Ofgem to a certain extent. To my mind, those seem to be quite focused on hydrogen production and less focused on the offtake market. And as a result, there's not really much of a hydrogen market out there right now other than at the local levels, it seems to me. And some of the incentives that are there are very much targeted at a market price. But without a market price, without a market, how do you deliver a market price? So hydrogen's got a less straightforward route as far as I can tell. I said that in terms of incentivizing change, I'd also talk about the kind of encouragement that is necessary. And here I'll talk a little bit about the NSTA's plan, which, as Polly mentioned, has been consulted on at the moment. Now, this is the plan which fleshes out operators' central obligation. That central obligation is, 1, to maximise the value of petroleum beneath UK waters, but 2, to take appropriate steps to assist the Secretary of State in meeting the new net zero target. Now, that strategy is in itself enforceable, and it's enforceable by the NSTA. And by enforceable, I mean that there are sanctions, there are warnings that can be issued, and penalties of up to £1 million should the plan not be adhered to. As I say, it's been consulted on just now. Now, some of the things in the plan are fairly hard-edged requirements, it seems to me. Pauline mentioned the Emissions Reduction Action Plan. On electrification, there are some absolute requirements, it seems to me. New developments with the first oil or gas date after the 1st of January 2030 must be fully electrified. Financial investments must be made to electrify all assets where it's reasonable to do so. So although there are some carve-outs there are things which operators are going to have to do, partly as a result of this plan. On flaring and venting, all assets must deliver zero routine flaring and venting by 2030. So there hasn't been much in the way of enforcement of those requirements yet, but there has been some enforcement from the NSTA. I know that 3 operators have been fined £265,000 for flaring and venting. Those seem like relatively small fines. It doesn't seem like those fines are routinely imposed. And I do question the extent to which enforcement is really the kind of thing which is going to drive change here. The last point I wanted to make was just on climate change litigation, because in the absence of hard-edged enforcement from the regulator, what we might find is that private parties are beginning to take matters into their own hands, which is the kind of thing we might be seeing in the likes of the Greenpeace litigation taken against the authority and the likes of the Finch case, which is in front of the Supreme Court just now, both of which focus on the extent to which Scope 3 emissions ought to form part of a planning authority's rationale when awarding licences and taking planning decisions. So there you have it. What I've said today is that the North Sea is going to remain very important. It's vital to our energy security, and I've seen that firsthand. The North Sea is going through changes, and I've highlighted some of those incentives for change. I think those changes are partly driven by increased regulation, and I've also gently suggested that their greater incentivisation could be made through enforcement, because in the absence of enforcement, we might find that private parties and climate change litigation is something that there is increasing reliance on. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thank you all for those presentations. We're going to have a quick discussion, and into the second half we'll invite audience Q&A, so get your questions loaded up for this lot. A lot of ground to cover there, but this is about decarbonisation. So I'd like to start with our targets, which a couple of our keynotes touched on. Pauline, you discussed it as well. The North Sea transition deal, has been the basis for these. And as you put out in your presentation, Pauline, 50% reduction in emissions by 2030 is the goal. Is the industry on track, in your view, for that? And especially, I suppose, regards those fields which are due to produce beyond that 2030 timeline.
So last year and every year we now produce an emissions monitoring report, and a little bit of feedback here. The progress to date has been really positive and has been really good, as kind of multiple speakers have said. What we have signalled is that the targets to this point, I guess you could describe as almost being that low-hanging fruit, and the next set of actions that you need to take to hit the 50% reduction by 2030 are the harder, more significant actions. And so it's definitely, so are we on track? Yes. Is there more to do? Most certainly. And that's partly why we consulted on an OGA plan. It's kind of, it was a recognition of saying there is more that needs to be done. We could see that, as I've said and we've discussed in this room, the kind of the two elements of visibility, what is it you want to do in the future, and kind of certainty, what clarity of your position, what is it you're actually looking for. So the OGA plan from our perspective kind of articulates that clarity, and to provide certainty to enable the decisions that need to be made to deliver the next set of emissions reductions targets. So simple answer, yes, we're on target, but there's a huge amount still to do.
Mitch, your rum case study you mentioned is really encouraging increased production without increased emissions. You said it yourself, though, big investment, a bit of a gamble when the time came from it. How would you, I guess, characterise this in the scale of what the UK has for its opportunities? Is that quite a typical case where that could go on, or is that quite a rare case as far as the portfolio out there?
I'd like to think that's a typical case, and quite scarily, I would include that in the low-hanging fruit that Pauline's talking about. I mean, these are things that we can do with existing technology on existing fields. And as an industry, we've managed to get this 25% reduction, but it's going to take a step change in investment going forward to get the next 25% and the final 50%. And so we do have to, and that's why in my talk at the end, although a little bit hurried, I was trying to get the point that we need to maintain the conditions to attract investment into our industry, because we're going to have to spend some really big money on decarbonisation to get the next 25%.
We're absolutely going to come back to the investment in a short while. Just want to quickly go to you, though, Rob, if I may. We talked about the North Sea transition deal. I mean, how does the UK stack up on the global stage for decarbonisation? And I suppose, is that social licence to operate linked to hitting these targets, in your view?
So how does it stack up globally? I think, here I would say we're certainly further ahead than many other areas in the world, and it just gives us the opportunity, as was mentioned in some of the talks earlier, to use the skill set we have to kind of transition that itself and apply it on the kind of reducing emissions, reducing carbon, and then being able to export that to all of the other fields. I mean, we have the, let's say, advantage of starting a lot earlier here. We have a very good skill set and in general a very kind of level type backdrop. And so it's a great place to implement these type of things. And I think really it was said earlier, as long as we have the investment, there's lots of opportunities to take it a lot further. There's lots of technologies that are coming available, but they do cost money to implement. And I think, with the right partnerships, you can make it work to implement them here, kind of showcase it to the rest of the world, and then, export it beyond that.
Super, thank you. Jamie, going back to the transition deal, quite a quid pro quo agreement, I suppose. I mean, your slides referred to the plan that's coming in from the NSTA, the carrot and stick metaphor wasn't lost, I'm sure, on everyone. being consulted on, as you say, but I mean, does that suggest a harder line having to be taken to hit some of these targets?
I think
With the
Pauline here
regulator
might,
sitting right next to you.
might be better able to answer that than I can. So, but my reading of the plan is very much that these are targets. These are things that ought to be achieved, but you can't help but look at it as a lawyer and think that there are significant carve-outs to some of those objectives that have to be hit. So, for example, I said, look, financial investment has to be made in electrification to the extent it is reasonable to do so. And to what extent is it reasonable to do so in the current marketplace where, as we were talking about earlier on, there isn't much of a grid connection that might be available? Or to what extent is it financially reasonable to invest in something where the site that you're drilling at is declining and there's not much revenue to be got from that in any event? And those are things which would make the role of the authority and enforcement function quite difficult if it ever did come to the point of view of trying to enforce these things. So I take the plan as an indication that there is going to be some objectives. This is very much the direction of travel. This is where we hope to get to. But as far as hard-edged enforcement, if you don't do this, then here are the fines that are available. Remains to be seen, and you might have a better view on it than I do, but I think the lawyers might have a field day with it.
That's a fun one, Pauline. I mean, yeah, I guess, the NSD is consulting on this, I appreciate that, but, as Jamie said, some harder lines it looks here in terms of electrification or being electrification ready. From your discussions, do you feel that operators and firms are ready to take those tough decisions? Why did you feel this plan has to be put in place rather than what we have with the NSTA and the transition deal?
I guess Jamie's presentation and was a neat example of where our regulator has tools at its disposal to drive the industry in the direction that we all want to see. So the OGA plan is an indication, as I said, of a kind of a direction of travel. It was a clarity. So I said in my presentation that my colleague Tom had written an open letter to industry last year saying this is what we expect. Well, the feedback that we had was, so what does that mean? What is it exactly you're looking for? So the OGA plan specifies that in a good bit more detail. We do believe from the analysis that we have done, we do think that the only way that we will hit the emissions reduction targets is by seeing some fields electrified. That's not every platform in the North Sea, but there are a certain number that it does make economic sense to do that. We can see that the economic return from electrification is not necessarily attractive to industry, but we do know that industry, like everyone, sees that sometimes you make investments for the greater benefit, and in this case, social license to operate and the climate being the greater benefit. So there's something about how can you focus the discussion and the attention where the action's needed, and that's what the OGA plan is an attempt to do. How enforceable is it? These are the steps that you move to in the next level. As a regulator, the NSTA approach has predominantly been about influence. We think the best way to get what we want in the basin is to have a coherent argument and a coherent rationale for the activities that we're doing. The regulatory enforcement powers and sanctions that you have, the stick, as it were, are things that you don't necessarily want to use and definitely don't want to use frequently. It's much better for all of us if there's an agreed way forward, and that's what we're aiming to deliver. So that's what the plan's trying to do.
Can I add, it's not just about the relationship between operating companies and the regulator. There are a lot of other stakeholders involved in this equation. We, as an industry, and I keep on going back to investment, but we have shareholders, we have banks, we have employees, and each of those, for various reasons, is very, very incentivized and wants us to be incentivized to concentrate on our social license to operate. So banks will not lend to companies that are at the wrong end of the spectrum. Shareholders will not invest in companies that are at the wrong end of the spectrum. And employees won't work for those companies. Increasingly, we see pressure from within, and we've got a great group of people working for us in our company and in the industry. They want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So it's not just about the regulator.
Before I circle back more on that investment piece, Rob, just to get you very quickly on this electrification side. I mean, again, these decisions are coming up. I mean, are you seeing more interest from customers and seeking solutions to these challenges? What's your view on it?
We certainly are. Where we see ourselves fitting in this is, as Mitch was saying, a lot of the fields are kind of, let's say, transitioning to being operated by mid to smaller independents, and that's where we have the advantage of our global footprint, our technology, and we can bring those in to these operators to bring the technologies to them, giving them the access that perhaps some of the majors may have. And yeah, that's, like I say, where I see us being able to bring our bit into this electrification.
Superb, thank you. So clearly decisions like this are tough enough as they are, I suppose, not just for electrification, but any investment decision you might be making. A few of our speakers have talked about fiscal stability and how much that's needed, that we were going to get to the politics of this eventually. Mitch, I mean, how concerning have some of the messaging been around the EPL, for example, in recent weeks? And I guess, do we get the investment we need if these policies are borne out?
I think, and I don't want to make any political statements here, this is not about party politics. Well, my response is not about party politics. I think it's been well flagged and well messaged that Norway has a very, very high tax rate and a very, very successful industry. It provides the environment that is needed to encourage investment, to encourage people to get out and do stuff. And that's really important. So tax rates are important, but a high tax rate is not necessarily a bad thing. What I think the problem we have in this country, and there's a great plot that I'm sure many of you have seen, and I can provide it if anyone wants it, it's the lack of stability in the tax regime in this country that is the problem. Nimble, dynamic, entrepreneurial companies will find ways to invest and will find ways to decarbonize and will find ways to improve production, whatever the tax rate. What they can't do is invest when they don't know what the tax rate is going to be in 6 months' time or a year's time. And there's been so much volatility in the UK tax system that is what is killing investment in our industry right now. And to be frank, it is making all operators across the North Sea review their investment plans for the coming year, because we cannot invest when we don't know what the tax regime, what the investment allowances are going to be in 6 months' time. I mean, it would be madness to invest in big new projects right now. So unfortunately, it is having an effect, but I'm not bleating about high taxes. I'm bleating about lack of stability.
Rob, as Mitch said during his session, the real kind of valuable resource we have here is the supply chain. The oil and gas supply chain, which will support wind, hydrogen, CCUS. If we lose some of the investment, which seems to be the suggestion, what does that do for the energy transition picture in that regard?
Well, certainly for the smaller and mid-sized independents, very reliant on the investment cycle, where we are already seeing some of those projects being maybe pushed out, delayed, potentially cancelled. And then as that continues to happen, and as the rest of the world continues to perhaps go the other way, there's a natural egress, if you like, of technology, of equipment that would go elsewhere. So that would certainly be a concern. I think we just got to make that right balance to ensure that it doesn't, while it helps in terms of exporting local talent, we've got to make sure there's a balance between that and keeping the right amount here so that we can take us through the transition. Because if it continues to go the way it could go, then certainly a negative impact on the whole transition, because it has a knock-on effect through the supply chain, for sure.
Jamie, just, I guess, into this general election run-up, I mean, do we think we'll see policy U-turns? I mean, will common sense prevail, I suppose, before more damage can be done? Sorry, you've got all the fun questions today, I appreciate that. But what's your view on it? I mean, will things proceed as has been mooted, I suppose?
Well, you can't help but think of it, I can't help but think of it as a lawyer from time to time, and when you, to your point, Mitch, the extent to which there is stability in a system, the North Sea transition deal, although it's set out in writing, it is not a legally enforceable contract. It's something that can be a different direction of travel. That would be a very difficult thing politically, though, for Labour to do. To the extent that parties have licenses and have existing contracts, that's not something that any kind of political a thing can get in the way of without any kind of recompense. So on the proviso that people have got private law rights in place at the moment, there's nothing much that the politicians can do with that. It's all of the forward-looking revenue basis, it's the tax, it's the policies that are a bit more up for grabs at present. But even then, I think it's politically very difficult for Labour to do much different than where they are at the moment. When I talked about the CCUS model and the hydrogen model, those are so far advanced now. It would be a very significant thing to change tack on either of those things, particularly given all of the very obvious benefits that they have. So I'm, as Pauline said, I'm quite hopeful that there won't be too much in the way of interference.
Pauline, assuming everything stays healthy, which we certainly hope, a big vision for that integrated energy basin, a huge opportunity. You touched on it, CCUS, hydrogen, electrification, decom, so much going on. I guess, and you talked, so I suppose, on the pooled resource we're going to have to rely on. How can we deal with, I guess, all of that work at once, and what are people going to have to start doing differently, I suppose, to do so?
So, listening to the conversation this morning and thinking about this conference, for me, there's kind of a Goldilocks moment where, everything aligns just right, and we find a way to align our existing hydrocarbon production with our decarbonisation requirements and with new energy and whether that's offshore wind, hydrogen, carbon capture and storage. And the sweet spot or the Goldilocks spot is and the supply chain is active in all of those things. And indeed, from the work that we have done, and I know that OE UK have been doing a piece of work and publish a report next month on this, to say that the oil and gas supply chain can be really active in all of those areas and can, in fact, you would argue, are needed in order to deliver the UK's energy ambition. But it is complicated. The set of ingredients isn't quite right at the moment. So we stand to win a lot, or we stand to lose out on opportunity. And I think all of us are trying to drive to that position of let's get that bowl of porridge just right. For me, there are things that we can do to make improvements. So from the decom perspective, when I started working in decommissioning, there was a real sense and feedback from industry that said, we know there's an obligation, but we don't have enough visibility on the work and we don't have enough confidence in its delivery. So that's why we've taken action to make work more visible and to improve certainty. We are working in the NST at the moment to look at the decarbonisation projects and saying we've got to do more in this space. And again, I was making reference to, I had a conversation this week with OE UK, who are also looking at decarbonisation and looking at the projects that come through the ERAPs. And effectively, if you line all of those up, you could have a glut of work going to the market all at the same time that the market then can't deliver, and a scramble for delivery. That doesn't feel sensible. Everybody feels that there's something in there that we can win. And so a little bit of analysis of the data and a bit of visibility to say, here's the scale of the opportunity, and then a collaborative approach to say, how do we deliver that, would seem to me the right way forward. Similarly, when I look at carbon capture and storage and look at the future of hydrogen, you'd want the same there. There's something about let's articulate what we want and need, and let's work as an industry, which is no one party saying I'm in charge, I know it all, but much more collaborative approach to say, here is what we want to achieve and deliver. How can we do that, and how do we build a supply chain and grow the supply chain to enable that to happen? So for me, it's on that visibility piece. And there is work happening on that. So it is all making progress, which is why I am optimistic.
Superb.
Just to add from the supply chain point of view, we're already seeing, taking just traditional, let's say, oil and gas type technologies, type services, and that transition into all of the CCS, geothermal, all of these things, it's starting to happen at quite a rate. Still not a big portion of what we're doing as let's say, a tier one supply chain, but it's literally doubling year on year. So one way or other, it is going to be a very large part of the business. And back to Pauline's point, if it all comes at the same time, then it does become a bit of a challenge. I'd say it's a good challenge, but certainly something to be wary of.
As long as you're resourcing and growing your business in order to deliver the growth.
Yes.
I just want to, on this collaboration piece, I want to touch on something that David Whitehouse mentioned. I don't know if this is perhaps for Jamie or for Pauline. We're not the only sector in play here. There's aquaculture, there's fisheries. It's a really crowded space we're talking about now. How has engagement been, I suppose, with these other sectors? I guess, how do you see that playing out? Jamie, perhaps?
Well, the thing that comes immediately to mind is something that Pauline and I were talking about beforehand. In order to electrify the North Sea, there has to be some sort of connection to mainland UK. And the connection to the mainland UK is not regulated by NSTA, it's regulated by Ofgem and the network companies. They're going to have to provide a connection out to these floating offshore wind farms or whatever it happens to be. And I think there is perhaps something of a gap there because there are very well publicised difficulties in getting grid connections on time. Some of those grid connections are quite far into the future. If you were to apply today, you might be waiting until 2030 before you got a grid connection. Now, when you look at the plan and it says that electrification has to happen by 2030, where is it going to connect to? So in order for this to all be joined up, that other sector, if you like, that other regulated space of electricity transmission needs to be able to speak to offshore electrification and do that pretty quickly. Now, there are some real changes that are happening. Ofgem has a grid connection plan, which came out in November 2023. There are some sort of changes which are going to accelerate connections to the grid. That really needs to happen, and it needs to happen fairly quickly in order for this to get to the place where I think everybody wants it to be. So that's just one example I can think of two sectors not really speaking to each other.
Absolutely. Mitch, just maybe to get you on this, the broad kind of collaboration piece, we're seeing operators club together for P&A clubs and things of that nature as well. I just get a sense from you, the appetite, different companies, is that changing in terms of, I guess, shifting schedules, working together and I guess working collegiately?
I think we're getting better at it. I think there's still a long way to go. But it's not just collaboration between groups of operators, it's collaboration or longer term collaboration between the supply chain and the operators that I think is most important, because as Rob said, there is a danger that we're going to lose services out of the North Sea. So we as operators have to be able to demonstrate to the supply chain that we've got work that they can do this year. It's not just what we're bidding for this year, it's what we're going to do as the follow-up work the following year and the year after. So we are trying to put in place longer agreements. Now sometimes that's difficult for both parties because we're not quite sure what we're going to be doing the year after next, but we know we need a vessel, we know we're going to be doing something because it's our business model to invest. And so building those relationships with suppliers is really important and as important as the putting together rig clubs.
We're seeing quite preliminary, to be clear, Pauline, some operators talk about repurposing opportunities, CCS hubs, geothermal, it sounds, again, that positive future space. So just to get, I guess, on CCS specifically, you mentioned it in your presentation, how much interest are you seeing in that space as the licensing authority?
For CCS or for repurposing and both?
Well, let's have both if you don't mind, actually. Yeah.
So a simple answer, a lot. Our licensing round was incredibly attractive, and there are, say, the 27 licenses that we've got at the moment that we're stewarding. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of new work that is progressing in the UK. So, and a lot of interest in making that happen. The repurposing as part of that is really being pretty fundamental. So, as I say in the example I gave in the E&I example, they have redundant oil and gas infrastructure that it makes complete sense from a win-win basis of repurposing
pipelines and repurposing some of their platforms. I mean, why would you take that away to then just invest and reinstall? That's wasteful on multiple levels. So, but it takes a different approach to planning for CCS and planning for decommissioning. But there's real appetite and real interest in and across the industry to do that. So it's pushing it an open door really, and people can see the attractiveness of repurposing redundant oil and gas infrastructure. Also can see the attractiveness of CCS as a business opportunity. So you marry those two together and you can make projects really economically viable. So lots of interest.
Superb. Jamie, can I maybe bring you on that as well? And I suppose as far as the new energy technologies goes, I think you mentioned subsidy support, and I guess to get your view of whoever might be in the next government, how the approach might be there.
I would second what Pauline has just said about the level of interest that there is from industry at present. I'm not standing up here to try and sell legal services intention, but I've seen quite a number of clients who are coming to us to say there are these new license conditions around CCS. What does the business model look like? Could you page turn it with us to go through what our responsibilities will be like? And the same goes for the hydrogen sector as well. We've got a new business model there, which looks very much like the contracts for difference model. There's a strike price, a reference price that is going to be set. At Shepherds, we are talking people through how that is going to operate and what they can expect in terms of the revenue that they're going to get. So the client base that we've got are certainly very keen on exploring those opportunities, and they've just come at the right time, I think. So I would second what you say, that there is a genuine level of interest there across industry.
Rob, maybe I'd just get you on that as well. And you know, again, do you think these are, I guess, predicated on a stable kind of fiscal environment?
Less directly impacted to oil and gas, but in terms of the interest, we certainly see it. I would say we're seeing it much more on the investigative side of things at the moment. So everyone's interested, everyone wants to know more, but we haven't yet gotten past that tipping point of everyone wanting to actually to do it. And I think that comes back to perhaps the background and the incentives. They have to be set up right to make sure that does actually happen. I mean, CCS perhaps is happening in that right direction, but things like hydrogen and geothermal and things, there still needs to be a lot of work around making the market conditions right to really make that take off.
Fantastic. We've covered some ground there, but I'm conscious I want to give everybody a bit of time for questions. Has anybody in the audience got any questions for our panelists? Very quiet. There's a gentleman there at the, I want to say the 4th or 5th row, and the roving microphone is roving its way over to you. If you could stand up and state your name firstly, please, sir.
Hello, good morning everybody. Thank you for your presentation. My name is Peter Cross from Subsea 7. Probably just general question for the panel. We've talked a lot about electrification this morning, and actually when we think back, we've been talking about electrification for a number of years, and the whole piece has changed since then. We've had a windfall tax targeting high profits at big production oil and gas prices, which has changed now. And now we're talking about an uncertain future, balancing decommissioning and reuse of CCS infrastructure. And yet we're still talking about electrification and the social right to operate, when actually a lot of operators would argue that on a global basis, they are doing the social things. We see BP and Shell and Total investing in wind in the UK and globally. Do we see that it's a worthwhile spend? And possibly for Jamie and the clients, why do that now, and rather than redeploy your money elsewhere?
Thank you very much for that. Jamie, it sounds like you've been volunteered for that one. So,
Yeah, so why do it now rather than redeploy your cash elsewhere? I guess it depends on the viability that you see in the areas in which you're operating. I mean, all too aware of the fact that companies can take their operations elsewhere, do something elsewhere. We weren't going to get into the politics of the windfall tax. We talked earlier on that we're not going to get into that too much, but I think it's difficult to avoid talking about it to a certain extent, because a lot of the investment in this industry has come as a result of tax relief, and there are some conversations about whether or not that tax relief will be changed. This is referred to as a loophole that might be getting closed. I think to go from an industry which has relied on that tax relief for reinvestment to having absolutely nothing overnight would be a very sharp shock. And I referred to the fact there's a massive gap between the 1 million I referred to and the 3.5 billion that might be, even on the lower estimate, needed. Clearly something needs to fill that gap. And if there's no positive subsidy available and if there's no tax relief available, then where does it come from? And that really does have to be, there needs to be something that fills that gap. And I would like to think that whoever the next government is will need to address what sits in that gap. So I'm afraid I don't have the answer other than to say I can see how the pieces fit together and what needs to fill that hole.
Pauline?
I think there's a potential misconception that there's not a lot of value left in the hydrocarbons in the North Sea, when that's not the case. There's a lot of oil and gas production to come and a lot of remaining value. So the question of the economics of decarbonisation, I mean, industry signed up to a voluntary target in the North Sea transition deal based on that, on those economics. So to see it maybe as so black and white as well, we'd rather not invest in the decarbonisation, maybe better taking our money elsewhere, would, to my mind, misunderstands the remaining value. So there is still a real value proposition for the sector, for the industry, even with achieving decarbonisation. And as Mitch said, there's a whole host of reasons why you would want to reduce your emissions, not just because of CO2 and saving the planet.
Yeah. Mitch, I mean, BKR, still plenty of value in that, but as said there's tough investment decisions coming up. I mean, how do you view that in terms of the electrification piece and the challenges there?
I think the electrification piece is difficult. If I just go back first, I mean, I agree with a lot of what Pauline says about just optimism for the future. I mean, I think it is there. There's a lot of value there. I often get told that I forget to smile, and if I'm looking glum, it's not because I'm glum. There is a great future for this industry. But we have to be realistic, and electrification projects are slow payback. They do work, it does work, and if we're confident the industry is still going to be here in 20 years' time, electrification projects make sense. If we're worried about the future, if we're worried that we're not going to be here in 5 years, it's very difficult to invest in those electrification projects because they don't pay back in that time. So to me, it's, again, I keep on coming back to the same thing, it's stability and knowing what the future fiscal regime is going to look like. Then we will go after these electrification projects.
Fantastic, thank you. Any other questions? Lady in the third row, I think it's Catherine.
Hi, thanks for the intro, Alistair. Catherine Milne, Global E&C. It was just really about the electrification subject again. The NSTA held a fantastic event last week all about electrification. There were something like 11, maybe 12 operators that were there disclosing, all their challenges that they were facing. And my sort of concern or what I noticed was that a lot of them are taking place all in the same year. They're all aiming for the same sort of timeline. So regards to the likes of Subsea 7, when you're looking at supply chain, how you're going to get the cables, how you're going to get vessels, is there a collaborative effort there that maybe the NSTA is looking at to see about shifting some of those timelines?
There's certainly work that thank you for the feedback on the session last week. This is a real conundrum for us in the NSTA. So we see the plans that come in from industry. We can see that everything's aligned or everybody planning at the same time. What I would love to do is to be able to make that more visible and have a collaborative conversation to say, okay, how do you make that deliverable rather than one person making the decision? So NSTA making the decision to say, well, we can't have 5 of these projects going all on in the same year. So what we'll do is we'll agree to that one, and that one, and we'll push that one back. Doesn't feel to me a credible way forward. What feels much more credible is to say, here's what we'd like to achieve, and then a collaboration with the supply chain to say, and how do we deliver that? So we've done this in the well decommissioning market a little bit to kind of say we could see that all the wells needed to be decommissioned at the same time, and it just made sense for us to say to the industry, well, here are the wells, go work out a plan that's sensible, and then come to us with a timeline that says, I can't do this year, but I can do it next year because I've secured a contract with this company and they've secured a contract with another company, and you've got a collaboration or a campaign approach. So I think that's where we're at with some of the decarbonisation projects. We've got lots of ideas in. We need to work out the ones that have real viability, and then we need to work out a way as to how we deliver those and how we make that more visible. And if we can do that collaboratively, I think we'll get a much better solution. The risks to that are that traditionally the industry has been quite conservative and almost in sharing its plans with industry and for fear of making promises that they then don't meet. So, as I said in my presentation, we've relaunched our decommissioning visibility dashboard. And what that has done in the decommissioning space is the operators have said, well, we'll share our 5, 6, 7, 8 year plans. We'll put a caveat on the data to say, it's not guaranteed that it'll play out like this, but this is what we're planning. Even making that available helps move the debate forward. If we could get to the same space in decarbonisation, I think we'd make progress. But waiting for one person to make a decision or to make a ruling, I don't think that's a sensible way forward. And on the finish up, and then I will stop talking. In the decarbonisation space, I know that this is definitely something that OE UK are doing. They are looking at a visibility model that kind of looks at this and says, how can we share this and make it more transparent? Sorry, Dave, I'm stealing your thunder.
Can I just pivot slightly, because we're talking a lot about electrification and I guess the direct emissions. What about scope 3 down the supply chain, the ESG piece? I mean, Rob, when it comes to things like tenders and contracting, how big a part of the conversation is that?
It's growing every day. So, but traditionally contracts wouldn't even mention things like that. And this is when we're talking about our customers, but also our suppliers. But now more and more it's becoming a key part. I wouldn't say it's yet helping decisions being made, but certainly becoming more important. And then from ourselves, just in around trying to help share the knowledge with some of the further down people in the supply chain, we really feel that it's part of our job to make sure we do that, to help them get up on the reporting. And so we do understand a little bit more about what Scope 3 really is and what sort of numbers we're talking about. Because until we really know those, it's very hard to start saying that we're improving on them. So yeah, progress being made, but we're still some way to go.
Maybe Mitch and Jamie, how do you see that developing and down the line? Is it going to become a harder obligation for the supply chain?
I think it's going to become a harder obligation for the industry throughout, and we're seeing this driven, again, coming back to one of my previous answers, we're seeing this being driven from the financial side of things. So banks and lenders need to know who they're lending to, and they're starting to include Scope 3 emissions in their screening process. And it's early days, but we are now, as an industry, starting to actually collect and collate and understand this data. And it does come into the way we operate, because there are things we can do in terms of looking at our Scope 3, and we do tend to look, generally, and it's an oversimplification, but we tend to look at gassier projects as being slightly more attractive than oily projects. And so there are lots of things we can do, and it is starting to come in, but it's very, very early days yet.
So I wonder whether it might become harder edged partly as a result of what I referred to. My presentation's very last point was about climate change litigation and the extent to which private parties are beginning to rely on Scope 3 emissions as the basis for their cases. There is a case in front of the Supreme Court just now. The judgment hasn't been issued yet. It's called Finch, where Mrs. Finch objected to the fact that the local planning authority approved oil wells, which were in Surrey. A little bit of NIMBYism going on there, perhaps, but essentially what she was saying is that you, local planning authority, took account of Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. You didn't take account of Scope 3 emissions, and you ought to have done that. Now, the High Court said there's no obligation for you to do that. That's fine. The Court of Appeal said that's not necessarily true. You ought to have and could have had regard to Scope 3 emissions, and now it's gone all the way to the Supreme Court, and we don't know what the judgment is yet. So if the Supreme Court does come out and say, actually, planning authorities and the likes of an NSTA does have to have regard to Scope 3 emissions, I think we could see all sorts of legal implications for that.
Very interesting stuff. We'll keep an eye on that for sure. Has anyone got any other questions for our audience? Last chance.
Thank you. Hi, Jenny Stanning from Offshore Energies UK. No, I'm not going to ask about politics. Don't panic. We've all spoken a little bit about investment, and we've also spoken about the importance of anchoring our supply chain here. And I just wondered, could we look to some of those international competitors who were competing with the capital and were worried about pinching our supply chain and our people? And could we learn some lessons from them? And when you look internationally, has anyone got this right? And is anyone doing it better than us? Whether it's government, regulator, industry, and can we take some lessons from our international competitors and bring that into the North Sea to help us address this challenge?
Rob, yeah.
Perhaps certainly, with recent events in Saudi, for example, there was a huge increase in demand, and it was having impact across, or still is having impact across the world. But then just recently they've sort of brought things back a little bit, and I think that in itself will send maybe a little bit of a breather through the rest of the supply chain. It takes a little bit of that pressure off. So maybe that's a bit of an obvious lesson, that when the demand goes up in one particular place, it does impact everywhere else. It's good to see that pressure being relieved. Not quite sure how we can then implement that as something we can do different here, but perhaps pass to the rest of the panel there to get their thoughts.
Maybe the other side of the world, maybe Pauline or Mitch, I don't know. I mean, we've seen, the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, a massive incentive for green investment. I mean, can the UK compete on that front? Whoever wants to go? Mitch, you're closest.
I think we can. I think we can learn that pro-business policies can help on a national level. We seem to have been a little bit scared as a country to encourage business and to encourage people to make profits, and so I think we can learn from that. I will always, and I'll be boring, I will always come back to stability though. And I can tell you there are countries, Morocco's a great example. I spent time working in Morocco. Oil and gas companies still go to invest in Morocco because it has a stable and a good tax regime. Unfortunately, it doesn't have much oil and gas, but people still go there to invest. And there is because they're encouraged, and they go, they spend money, they encourage local industries, they create wealth and growth in those countries. We aren't doing that, and we have to get more stability.
Okay, well, lots of discussion there. I'd just like to finish up going down the line, if I may. I mean, obviously, whether or not people are going to be appetite for going into a general election stuff or not, but we're weighing up uncertainty against what is clearly a big investment opportunity. Starting with yourself, Jamie, I guess, do you see a positive future, in the near term for this sector?
I do, and certainly the people that we're talking to on a day-to-day basis also see that positive future. They're not discouraged or the fact that there's going to be a general election. As I say, that these business plans, the likes of hydrogen and CCUS, are now in play, they're in law. It would be very difficult to revoke all of that. So some of the main anchor points for what the future looks like are, I think they are really very encouraging.
Colleen?
I mean, I've already declared my hand here. I guess that what I can see is that this industry's got really tenacious lot, and if things annoy them, they make a noise and they find a way to overcome barriers, to get points across. I mean, that's a phenomenal strength, and like I say, I think that gives us great optimism that there are challenges that we're facing now, and there will be challenges ahead, and it's not, for me, it's about how we approach it. As I say, I think we are well placed to be really annoyed and get solutions.
Mitch?
Yeah, I've already said I'm optimistic, and this is what we do. We manage risks. You know, the industry historically used to manage subsurface risks and drilling risks and production risks. In the last few years, we've been managing COVID. We've been managing extreme volatility in prices. Both, you know, gas prices just a couple of years ago were below 20 pence a therm. We managed that. We survived. We carried on investing. We're managing tax risks now. You know, we had EPL1, EPL2, the threatened labour change. These are not new things. We're always having new problems thrown at us. And as an industry, we're very resilient and we find a way around it. So I'm still optimistic that, that there's a good future for our sector.
Super. And Rob?
And like I was saying earlier, for me, the common sense will prevail. I think the logic of the decades to come of the supply here, we're going to continue to need it. The fact that the carbon side of things will look better and better for here, you know, put all that together along with the energy security and so on, there's no question that things will continue to be good here and then help sort of lead the way in this transition, taking the supply chain with it to be able to supply to all of the new energy side of things as well.
Superb. Okay, well, look, thank you very much for that discussion. Clearly a critical time for us, but an opportunity on the horizon, no doubt. We're going to take a networking break now. We're going to be back in here about 11:15 for our next session on future innovation and skills. For now, please join me in thanking our terrific panelists for that discussion. Okay.